discussion with all the presenters when Rolf is done. So the floor or the stage is yours, Rolf.
Thank you, Henrik. And thank you for ForestX and to 1050 for organizing this and for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. Very much appreciated. So my name is Rolf Schmitz. I'm the CEO of CollectiveCrunch. And what I would like to address is a little bit sort of the hype and the reality of AI, then introduce our company in a bit more detail, and then towards the end, use an example that hopefully for you as users of AI in the future to frame the thinking of how to use it and what to expect, and specifically what to expect from AI, because that in our experience has been frequently a bit of a problem that the hype has driven over expectations. So probably the best example I could think of in terms of hype was Elon Musk. AI will overtake humans in 5 years. Really? There's a lot of hype there, and he might have meant something more narrow than AI takes over everything, but in a specific context, absolutely. But as a general statement, probably too optimistic. So what is the challenge or the opportunity in a way? 80% of the world's data has been created in the last 2 years. And that statement has been true for 4, 5, 10 years in the past. As social media came on board, sensors come in vast quantities and generate data. And so the question really is, how do we handle this data avalanche that the world is in the process of creating? And closer to reality in terms of the hype and the reality of data becoming more available, which is a good thing, then really AI will take over the processing of data and the business of finding patterns. And of course, I followed David's presentation, and some of the things that I've seen there, unfortunately, I didn't understand everything in Swedish, but that looks very similar to the challenges we're facing and the work that we've been doing. So let me bridge into introducing the company in a bit more detail. Some key facts: Finnish-German company, founded 2016. We raised a total of 2 million in capital. Our expertise is in big data, geoinformation systems, and AI. Customers in the Nordics and Baltics, strong interest from USA and Canada and Europe. We're a team of 15. And 3 founders we actually don't come from the forestry industry, but from mobile PC internet, where, for example, in mobile communication call data records, you have vast amounts of data that you mine and try to create and base your decisions on. And what we've done is in the last few years, and with many person years invested, we've created what's called LindaForest, our product. And at its core, it's a GIS system with many, many layers. So Google Maps is probably the best known GIS system on the planet. It's got 5 to 7 layers, depending on what's under the hood. And from the outside, it's that kind of number of layers. And they are static in the way that they don't give you a history. You just look at what is there today or what has been there at the last acquisition of data. So for example, when you use satellite data in Google Maps, they can be 2, 3, 4 years old. And our system has a lot more layers and very different kind of data sets, and they go back in time. So for example, we have climate data in there. The climate data goes 40 years back. So we know in a microclimate grid, the climate that has been surrounding a specific stand and set of trees for many years. We then take satellite data, optical, near optical data, and so forth. We take LiDAR data if it's existent, public, or our customers have it. And then we have soil data, which is also satellite, remote sensing based soil data, moisture in soil data, specific attributes of the soil. All of that can be derived. And we calibrate that complex data system and the modeling that we derive of that. We calibrate that, for example, with harvester data. And modern harvesters, they've got GPS location, they point towards the tree, they measure the tree. So that is the best ground truth available in this market, and we've vast quantities of harvester data to train our models. And although it's a complex system from the user side, it's fairly simple in that it's SaaS-based. It's a little bit like Google Maps. You look at an area, you focus on the area that is of interest, and then you have two views. You have a grid view, which is a 10 by 10 meter or 16 by 16 meter view, or you aggregate to stand level to make decisions on supply chain, to make decisions on thinning and things like that. And what the system gives you in this view here is effectively the key parameters of forest inventory: total volume, species breakdown, things like need to do thinning, to fuel growth, to support growth, harvest planning, but also things like if you put in new seedlings, that you can track the health of the seedlings by tracking shrubbery that might be overgrowing and preventing the seedlings from growing. So that's the kind of, sort of very briefly, the kind of technology that we've created and the solution that we've created. I quickly want to go into two use cases for this. The first one is forest inventories, and for example, we've worked for a number of years now with Metsähallitus, the Finnish state forest, and we have recently started to work with the help of Forest X with Sveaskog. We've started working on it in the last couple of weeks, and effectively the need that we're addressing there is to come to forest inventories, to come to better decisions, to make that entire process of acquiring, of estimating forest inventories more efficient. Part of that is to save the logistics of driving out to remote forest and measuring and to save that time. And part of it is to get to better accuracies, because the accuracies in these sort of natural resorts is not particularly high. So without going into a lot of detail here, effectively what LindaForest gives you is a better and cheaper forest inventory. And the second case I want to mention here is effectively the same thing, but for carbon analytics. If you want to do carbon trading or carbon verification, and this is a high growth market because there's a lot of interest in offsetting carbon by companies as well as countries, you effectively need a delta in the forest inventory. The carbon that is being absorbed by trees and by forests is the forest inventory at the beginning of this process and then the delta towards at the end of this process. And so it's the same technology, but a different kind of application that is somewhat complicated by the policies and the standards around CO2 certification. But in our core, our analytics, it is sort of the same technology. The key thing about LindaForest compared to, let's say, flying a drone over an area or many other technology solutions in this field is that LindaForest really scales to dramatic sizes. So there's a mistake in this slide. For some reason, 2021 is not visible. I'm not sure what happened there. I apologize. In end of 2020, we were 5 million hectares in coverage of LindaForest, and that is growing at the moment to 9-10 million hectares. So it's applicable on a vast scale, and that is a key benefit in terms of the system for holders of very large areas of land. So finally, in terms of the company itself, before I go into the example where I want to sort of create a framework of how to think of AI as a user, just briefly on the customers that we have. There's Dasos Capital, was very early adopters, Metsähallitus, but also Tornator, which is part owned by Sveaskog, the largest Finnish private forest land holder with also assets in other countries. Sveaskog is a recent joiner. There's Koskituki. RMK is the Estonian state forests, and so we've worked with some of the largest to have the kind of vast amounts of data that help train AI models with the view of the solution that I've described. So we talked about the hype. We talked about sort of trying to make that a little bit more realistic. I've introduced the company, and we have quite significant experience in handling AI projects, in AI solutions and so forth. And as David was saying, it tends to be you model and then you pilot and then you go towards use and then you go fully commercial, and that's a very similar sequence for us. And in that process, we time and again discuss then and come to expectations that are maybe not entirely realistic with considering the data that we have today and the tools we have today. And so I hope that this example of what to expect from AI, or that this example helps us to shape what to expect of AI and sort of how to approach as a thought process an AI project, if you consider one in the next couple of months or quarters. So I thought of a simple example for illustration. So what we see here is Google Maps satellite image near the Forest X offices in Gothenburg. And there is a road there, it's Kungsbackaleden. And let's say we wanted to predict the traffic on next Wednesday, tomorrow afternoon, 5 to 6 p.m. The data source we're assuming we're having is traffic of the last 30 days. That sounds reasonably simple and it's almost trivial, and yet we'll see in a quick discussion that it fairly quickly gets to, you can't just have the AI model it and hope for the best. And the reason I'm saying this is that, what about concerts happening? What about public holidays? What about other events? What about road construction? What about the pandemic having an impact on the traffic that we're trying to predict? So effectively, we need to think of what does the data contain? What does it actually contain? Versus to what might be happening in our context outside of the data or inside of the data. And we need to be aware of these changes, because otherwise we're introducing significant error in the models that we're building. And so the core of this now, going into a couple of examples. So let's say our purpose of the analytics is to predict the traffic on a normal Wednesday. For that, we don't really need AI, we need an average. But what average? Even if we just take the average, there's already a question. What do we do? What do we take actually as an average? Do we take the 4 weeks we have, Saturdays and Sundays, and then average with every day in there? Probably not, because the weekend introduces error. If we take just Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, it might be a good idea to do that, because the Mondays and Fridays tend to be busier on the roads. So even on this extremely trivial thing of what's the traffic on a normal Wednesday, we already have a couple of options. We're not even touching AI at all. But then the moment you introduce other parameters, let's say we need the prediction to plan the traffic on a given day, then is there a concert on the day or not? Is it a work day? Is it a public holiday, with or without road construction? Immediately we get these kind of questions. And it isn't just that the modeling itself needs to consider these, but also you need to look at your source data to say, maybe there was a public holiday in there. Maybe I need that for my modeling, or maybe I don't. And so in this extremely simple case already, I have questions of what is in the data and what should go into the model. And if I oversimplify these kind of processes, I introduce very significant errors. And these kind of questions, that's sort of my core point here, is you can't, even in this very trivial example, just give it to the AI to solve it. In the sense of Elon Musk saying, AI will take over the humans. Do you give AI the calendar to take account of public holidays? Do you give AI a calendar of local events that will impact your analysis. And these kind of things, they will need, from all that we can see, they will need human intervention. And you will need to answer these questions and put into your modeling carefully to arrive at optimal solutions. And imagine if these are the sort of branches out and the options and the things we need to debate in a super trivial example. If you take this then into the world that David just explained, where you have vastly complex systems or our AI inventories, then very quickly in your daily work you come to what's actually in the data. What does the data mean? What does it include? What might be errors that are in the data on day one that you might need to filter out to optimize your predictions? And so I hope that this kind of framework helps with you thinking about your future projects in AI. Maybe towards a tentative conclusion here. So AI needs data. So I would strongly advocate and recommend that you think strategically about the data. In fact, that is not a very exciting area and field of activity. But we did write a white paper on it because data management is so important. It's probably one of the most boring topics you can write a white paper on, but we still did it because time and again we came in our interactions with data, customer data, public data, and so forth. We came to suboptimal use of the data, to loss of data. And today, if you think strategically about data, you also need to think about the flow of data acquisition. You might have a remote sensor that's somewhere out in the field writing into a memory, and then you need to make sure that you read that memory into a central system. There is this notion that storage is so cheap, it's also almost meaningless in cost terms. But that only applies to centralized data. So it's what's the flow from your sensors that you might have remotely, or in a factory floor, like one of the examples from David. How do you make sure that all of that data gets into a system, is labeled properly, that you can work with it? So that's certainly something where I think we will continue to need to work all as an industry, because the storage systems, the sensor systems are developing so fast that you can't just set this and forget this. You need to revisit it every two years or so to account for technology change. And the next one is, whenever we come to what can the AI actually predict? What Christoph, our CTO, always says in this case is, if there are patterns in the data, then we will find it. But that's the reason I took this example. Patterns aren't all equal. There's some patterns you want, and there's some patterns you don't want in the data, and some you want in the modeling, and some you don't want in the modeling. And in the sort of final part of the conclusion, what will AI actually take over? To stay with the Elon Musk example, we firmly believe that AI will take over the routine decisions that you derive from data. And these routine decisions are then a help to the experts. And so, for example, we have had a very, very extensive debate with one specific customer on this, and also a couple of potential customers in Germany, where there were concerns around, making people, pushing people into unemployment. That's not the intention of anybody. What is happening is that you give help with routine decision support to foresters to make better decisions and to focus on the new challenges. We have climate change, we have bark beetle. So some of our customers are extremely happy that we can give tools to the forester on the routine side of things to then focus on the things that are not yet in the data, like a bark beetle problem, or like stronger storms causing bark beetle in the first place, and so forth. I see Henrik coming in. I'm almost there. And so finally, I hope I've sort of created some interest in what we do, and that this session has been helpful in terms of framing the discussion around AI. As Chris has said in his session, we have a strategic partnership with ForestX and us, CollectiveCrunch. And so in terms of context, my name is Rolf Schmitz, the email is here, but our local partner, our Swedish, Danish, Norwegian partner is Forest X, and so we would welcome, if there's interest, we would welcome any discussions that might follow. Thank you very much for your attention so far.
Thank you very much, Rolf. And I mean, there is unfortunately no way of kind of sneaking in this tool. I mean, when you appear, you appear. So, but we have plenty of time. We have plenty of time. So please, if also Christer and David could join the discussion, we will have some minutes of discussion and questions, and there are questions in the chat that we will answer. Maybe when we get organized, Rolf, I have a question for you also. I mean, you talk about, and others as well, that it is all about data. And I mean, maybe one of the paradigms that we need is that this area of data management should not be perceived as boring, but really sexy. I mean, that is the thing to work with. But if you for your tool, LindaForest, would wish a new data set. I mean, you have historical weather, you have good geographical data, there were soil quality and so on. I mean, what's on the top of your wish list when it comes to data to take this solution to the next step?
I think the data situation in the Nordics is pretty good. What we do see is that when you then move to, particularly Sweden, Finland, the data situation is good, and we don't really see significant gaps in the data that prevent us from getting to the solutions. But when you go to other markets, then LiDAR might not exist at all, and so forth. I think so. That's sort of a general statement. The other one is, we're moving in the forestry management to, there's a big trend and a big discussion to move away from clear cutting, and that requires additional data. If you don't clear cut, you only take out the largest trees and so forth. If you want to work with these kind of patterns, with these kind of practices, you need the data to model it. And so that is something that is going to be really interesting in these markets, that all that data that leads to these new practices that needs to be in the data sets to describe that and to derive that. That would be sort of my initial thought here.
There was also, I think, quite a specific question for you, Rolf, here.
Yeah.
You said the LiDAR.
Yep.
So, yeah. What about the quality? Your solution is better. Why? How?
Yeah, good question. The LiDAR, one disadvantage of the LiDAR is, of course, it's a snapshot, and it ages very quickly. So the moment you shot it, it's great, but then as you go along, it ages and the trees grow, and you don't have that analysis. So and it's good at some things like height, and not very good at resolution of species. So those things in principle. But the question is also towards accuracy. And the accuracy is derived off the harvester. So let's say you have, some of our customers, they have the LiDAR practice still active. They use our system, and when there's a new harvest, they take the harvester output to calculate the error rate. And that's how we can definitely say we are more accurate than LiDAR.
Thank you. Maybe a question also from me, and I will leave it open, but I'm thinking maybe Christer and Rolf, that is meeting a lot of people in the forestry industry. Based on your discussions with different companies, can you see, is there a common denominator between the ones that are progressing fast and are now consuming this new technology in a good way, and the ones that are maybe struggling a bit? What are the differences? And that can be read as a tip also for the ones that are not feeling that they are moving fast enough. Are there any differences? Maybe Christer first.
I can see, if I take it like your question there, I can see the of course the commitment from the management. It's really that because this is something you need some seed money, you need some money to start this, and that money is probably not from the ordinary budget. So commitment and understanding from management is very important. And then back to Rolf again. the forest companies that I've seen that has really good control of the data, that have collected data for a long term, they have in some sense better advantage of that, because they can process the data they have today. So we've seen some companies that hasn't so much data yet, and they need to collect the data, of course. So I can see that's different, the data and the commitment, if I put it into.
Something to add, Rolf?
I would definitely, I would agree with that. The commitment is really important. And if I add one thing, but really lower order to what Christoph has already said, which I totally agree with, is there is sometimes in the organization sort of a bit of a fear of AI making everybody redundant. And part of that is driven by the hype of, Elon Musk and so forth. And I don't really see that happening at all. I think it's a tool to help you become more efficient, not much more than that. So that at times we see. Other than that, it's driven by the data that the company has and the senior commitment.
And also, I turn myself to David. I know we talked about in the beginning that you saw in the very early stage in our relationship that forest industry should have a very big potential of using AI, since they have so much unprocessed data to use to train the models in that. I guess you agree on that, David.
Well, absolutely. And a history of using statistics already.
Yeah.
So the only bottleneck, as I see it, computing power is never a bottleneck. I mean, 95% of models can run on my cell phone. It's never anything. The biggest bottleneck is industry awareness. What can you do? How expensive is it? What can I gain from it? To always have, not only in the forest industry, in every industry.
Yes, I guess one key element is what we are trying to do here, that we want to take away the magic. I mean, this is just a tool. And I mean, on that note, maybe to take away the magic, I think it's both Rolf and David touched on it. And I mean, we have on the 1050 LinkedIn page, we are currently running a poll on if you want David to explain something about AI, what should he explain? And everyone is asking to tell, when do we have general AI? When will we have this Elon Musk vision? So maybe you should comment on that, David. What do you think? I mean, should we fear general AI? Will there ever be general AI? What's your thinking?
There will definitely be general AI, and we should definitely fear part of it, but it's not going to be in the near future. In 2017, in the largest AI conference, ICML, they did a study on 350 something AI researchers and asked them, when do we have general AI? And about in the median answer was about 2060. So that's pretty far from the Elon Musk vision. And in 2019, another similar survey at another conference was done with other people. And once again, you got a median figure of about 2060. The most aggressive visionaries, like the most aggressive AI visionaries, such as Ray Kurzweil, and also some scientists would say maybe 2045. So it's a far way off. It's coming, but it's not something we need to address in business today.
No, and maybe it's clear and some people rather talk about augmented intelligence as the spelling out of AI than artificial intelligence, because it's then more clear that it is there for help for us. And as you presented it, it's basically automated statistics. But what do you say, Rolf? I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
Will there be some magic in the future with the general intelligence?
I'm not sure that I'm the right person to make that call, but I can certainly say a few words. One thing I would say is that in specific cases, it can definitely take over. I've been always wondering if what Musk was actually saying was self-driving cars. And I can definitely see, in my own kind of vision, I could see self-driving cars in a couple of years. It's a very specific task that you get towards. You build very specific models. The biggest problems are known, and you work around the biggest problems. I would see that pretty quickly, even sort of with regulatory approval, which is going to be a big hurdle. I could see that in, pick a number, but below 10 years. And that's sort of the thing that in specific areas, but it's not general AI. So I can see a lot of advances, and I'm convinced that a lot of advances will be made before we get to general AI. And maybe one thought on the sort of magic and the hype. I mean, I'm the first to admit that hype is also good. We would not have the number of people in this webinar, or we would not find it as easily as to get our customers interested and engaged if there wasn't the hype around it. And actually, in many ways, it's enormously powerful when you build a model like, modeling 6-10 million hectares of forest. It is extremely powerful once you've created that specific model. So in that sense, I think we need to find a balance here.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I think we touched upon the question from Marcus already, at least David did. But Christer and, sorry, it's the wrong one. It's this one now. So maybe Christer and Rolf, I mean, do you have anything to add? I mean, what is the current biggest bottlenecks, maybe then specifically in the forest industry, do you think? And that could then also be, again, read as what is the first step to take?
Rolf, I answered that on the chat, but that's my one of my key issues here is that again, you need to have the alignment of the company on the business strategy and the leadership. You need to be aware of people that has to be a part of this change, of course. And one thing I see that it has to be some kind of R&D, has to be some kind of piloting. You don't every time need to find a business value to calculate to start a project, but you need to have a sponsor. So it's very important to have a sponsor in the organization. That's more in general. What I see in the forest industry is again, I would like to see more common initiative. I see many things happen internally in the big companies, but and that's good. That's good for them and that's good for the business. But I would like to see more happening in the. We know that we have some parts in Sweden with Biometria, SLU, Skogforsk. I want to see more of that be out there in real solutions. That's very important. And also, I'm very happy to see what's happening in Norway and then hopefully in Denmark as well. So that's all I can say on the forest industry. And be open for changes.
Rolf, any final words in English before I shift to Swedish? Yeah.
Thank you again. I definitely agree with David. Computing power is never the problem. That's something easily fixed. I think that data scientist shortage is a concern, but ultimately, if you have the projects, I think ultimately you'll find the data scientists. So it's a management problem. I think the industry awareness is something that we need to drive, and I think this webinar is an excellent idea to get there. And maybe one final thought on this, what we've come across occasionally is that people do things internally and not turn to a product. And I think there's a lot to be said to build AI capacity internally. But I would recommend to only do that if there isn't a product in the market. So if we are in a very narrow space with forest inventories. It will be very hard for an internal team to solve that problem better than we do. And so I think for any AI initiative that happens internally, which I would absolutely applaud, and I think it's a great idea to look at this and build up these skills and these muscles, But I would strongly recommend to go into the fields where there isn't a solution in place right now, because that helps us all to move faster. Because ultimately, if there is the scale that supports a product, then the product is probably the better route than the isolated internal solution. And so that's something that I would add to. If there's a product, go with the product and build your internal muscle on something where there isn't a product. And there's a lot of fields where there isn't a product today.
Thank you very much. Vielen Dank. Thank you to all of you. Tack så mycket alla som har deltagit, och tack så mycket förstås till er som har presenterat. Klockan är några få minuter i 12. Det drar ihop sig till lunch, och vad jag förstår på många platser i Norden en synnerligen lämplig tid för en liten promenad i det fina vädret. Vi kommer att fortsätta vårt arbete med att försöka öka industrins kunskap. AI är inte magi, utan det är någonting som vi kan ha nytta av här och nu. Nästa webbinarium är den 26 maj. Då ska vi, som Christer sa, tillsammans med Anders och Johan Bergström från Sveaskog prata lite mer om själva förändringen. Vad krävs av oss som människor? Vad krävs av oss i företagen för att driva den här förändringsprocessen? Har ni tips på saker ni skulle vilja att vi belyser, hör av er. Ta det lugnt. Ni kommer att få presentationer och länk till inspelningar och länk till anmälan tillsänt er via mail så småningom. Så stort tack för idag. Ha en riktigt fin tisdag och hoppas att vi ses snart igen. Hej med er!